So now we're going to turn to some slides on customer and market focus, business models, and logistics for industrialized construction. Let me start by saying this was intended to be given in about 2 weeks, and because we had to move some things around with the guest lecture, this is probably a little bit earlier than where you need to be in your course project. So if you look at the syllabus and the schedule, the goal for last week was that you began to brainstorm some ideas for your technical building solution, and that this week you're really working on building out a minimum viable product. So you'll get some kind of direction on that in Firhiwat's video. But this was going to be in about 2 weeks where you need to start looking at the design of your business model and how your logistics will be set up for your project. But the customer and market focus, which will be a big part, can be applied at any point in time. So I think it'll be helpful. We did expect that you would have a guest lecture by Erne and by Bokluk before. So it's a little bit of a preview. But I think it will make sense, and then it will hopefully help also that the future lectures by Erne and Bokluk can fit a little bit better. But yeah, let's jump right into it then. So I'll start by our famous framework here for industrialized construction. And today, the real focus is here on the customer and market, but we will be touching on logistics and the long-term relations between stakeholders. So that's where we're kind of oriented for today. And if you remember from 3 weeks ago now, we talked about platforms, systems, and products. And we talked about this, which is the ability to look at design entry points for customization and understand kind of how you set up your production system impacts the choices that your customer will be able to have. So you can have more flexibility, which leans more towards this idea of engineering to order. Then you could have kind of platform engineering, or often called make to order, configuration engineering, which we talked a lot about last week, which is this idea of mass customization. And then select variant, which is essentially you tell the customer, here's what you can have, and you can either buy it or not buy it. And of course, the advantage as you go vertical is more flexibility, but the advantage as you go in this direction is more predictability, because you have more control of the processes. And this will come back into play in today's lecture, so keep this a little bit in your mind. But let me jump back to this idea of customer and market focus. This is a little bit unique to industrialized construction when compared to the rest of AEC. Industrialized construction is really defined by having a clear understanding of customer and market focus. Why is that? If you're going to invest in high-end, design to production processes and factories and supply chain, you need to be sure that you're building the right products. You need to make sure you're building at the right quality to be produced at the right cost for the end customer and the clients. It's because you're making these high-end investments that this is necessary. And if you remember back to the lecture 3, we talked about the existing industry structure and how essentially the business model of traditional construction is that everything should be costed to a specific project. So all of your costs need to be accrued and paid for by that single project. But when you're talking about industrialization, now you need to invest in oftentimes heavier machinery or more technologies, and that needs to be distributed across your product platform and multiple projects. And so you need to make sure you're building the right thing. This also, it's important that you create knowledge about the customer's needs, priorities, and expectations. And this is something we see with product engineering and product development, is to strategically divide customers and markets into different segments with specific characteristics. Again, I'll use an example from the car industry, but you can have a luxury car or kind of a lower end car, and those are designed very specifically with different requirements for different customers because they try to understand what the customer needs are. And then you can take that customer focus and integrate it into the design and development of the technical systems and the configuration of the building. And so this kind of comes together with the idea of industrialized construction firms have a specific strategy, and your startup that you're proposing will have to think about what is your strategy going to be. And in fact, in the final project report, you need to identify what your strategy is. And today I'm going to show you how to do that. So on the left, we've already talked about this. This is the customer order decoupling point. We've already touched on some of these ideas, but on the right, we're going to talk about the resource base. I'm sorry, we're going to talk about the strategic perspective. And so this is, on the right, you have a little bit of a diagram here. I'm going to talk about it here. This is kind of the overall business system. So first I'll start here. Here's the product offering or the value proposition. This is what you're developing right now. This is kind of your solution. And then you have on the top a resource base. So this is the assets that you have. These are the knowledge or the machinery or the other assets that you possess. And they meet in the middle through the activity system or the value chain, which is your production system. This is where logistics come in, which I'll talk about at the end of the lecture. And then there are two specific strategic perspectives you can have. The first one is an outside-in perspective you see here, and the second one is an inside-out perspective. So I'm going to just, before I get into that, I'm just going to simplify where we're going today and just say an easier way to think about it is right here. So that's a more complicated diagram, but let's make it simple. So there's a spectrum. On one side is an outside-in perspective, and the other side is an inside-out perspective. All right, what does that mean? Let's talk about it. Let's give two examples. So an outside-in perspective is known as a market-based view of the business system. So a market-based view will analyze the market, find the gaps, and create an offer to satisfy the needs, and then organize the optimal production system for it, right? So this means you think about what do the customers in the market need without thinking about what the technology is that will deliver that, right? It's saying, this is what people need, what they can pay, and then I'll devise a production system to provide what they can pay for, right? So it's a very market-based, what will the market pay, and then can I create something that meets those market needs? And next week, we're going to hear the example of Beauclerk. So again, the original plan was this would be after the Beauclerk example, but I can bring a few things forward. Beauclerk is a joint venture between Skanska and IKEA, and these were just a couple of things from their website where they talked about the kind of original idea between the two leaders of Skanska and IKEA when they set up Beauclerk. They said it must be possible to build good housing for ordinary people with ordinary jobs, right? So again, trying to understand what do people need? What does the market need? And then they talked about asking first and then planning, right? So not planning something and then finding out if somebody likes it, but kind of asking the customer in the end, what do you like? And this is a quote from the Beauclerk website that I'm going to read to you. They said, when we started planning Beauclerk, we decided to look at some important facts first, such as whom are we building for? What are they able and willing to pay? And how do they want to live? The answer was, we should imagine our buyer being a single preschool teacher with one kid and a small wallet. This family would prefer something bright and roomy near nature and public transportation. One can say it sounds contradicting, such a good living at such a good price, but we chose to take it on as an inspiring challenge. So we're seeing here that they're thinking about a customer segment that they want to design their company around, and then everything is organized around meeting that need. So that's an outside-in perspective, or it's also known as a market-based view. All right, so that's the first one. The second one is the inside-out perspective. All right, and this is known as the resource-based view. The idea here is that the company's core competence and capabilities are the starting point, and you can create a business model based on that. So we just heard from Conrad the example from the DFAB house, and the idea, and Conrad is correct in saying this wasn't really a fully industrialized production system. It was meant to be a single project and a demonstration of the technologies. But if you were going to create an inside-out perspective from the DFAB house, you would begin with the core competence and capabilities. You would say, what do we know how to do better than anyone else? We know how to build robotically fabricated curvilinear walls here with the mesh mold and the in situ fabricator. And we're the only ones in the world that really know how to do that. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but close to it. So now we're going to make a business model around that key technology, and we're going to develop upon that technology so that we can create a strong company from there. And so this is the inside out. You look inside first, what do we do well? And then you look out, what is the market potential for this technology? The other example I like to use here might be the company Erne. These are these are a couple photos from our field trip last year. I know I'm very disappointed that we were not able to arrange the field trip this year due to the coronavirus situation. But we will have a guest lecture from them, and they do a really nice job of explaining a lot of their core competencies, which are around digital fabrication, timber fabrication, and some of their core competencies. So they're a good example as well of the inside out perspective. And in fact, they helped with the DFAB house. They were key industry consultants and players with some of their robotic fabrication technology. They also were responsible for building the roof in the ITA building. If for those of you that have been and seen the roof structure, they used their robotic fabrication to build that. So they have a very inside out perspective, very strong technical competencies. So in other words, you have these two different perspectives and neither one is right or wrong. In the outside in perspective, you have a market-based view where the customer and the market perspective are the starting point. In the inside out perspective, it's the resource-based view with your technical production perspective as a starting point. And the direction your company takes, it can be structured differently depending on what perspective you come from. So this is where neither one is right, but instead it's about understanding what your strength is, where you come from, and then making strategic decisions based off of that. So if you're an outside-in perspective, then you really need to understand your customer very well. You really need to understand the market, and then you need to make sure that the system that you design will be something that your customer can pay for. And if you're an inside-out perspective company, you really need to understand your production capabilities strong, and then you need to figure out, is there a market for where I want to go with these production capabilities, and have to really try to understand how you can translate that into a compelling business model. We'll say more about business models in a second, but I want to give you a chance to do a little bit of breakouts, keep it more interactive. So we've heard from 5 different case studies in the class. We've heard from more than that, but I just listed 5. So we heard about New Story, their 3D printing. We heard about Daiwa House in Japan. Digital building components and Katera were 2 case study examples I used with the new business models from Silicon Valley. And we also briefly heard about Vedica and their Building Max system. So what I'm going to do is we're going to move into our breakout rooms. I've assigned these by your team, so hopefully there won't be, you know, brand new breakout rooms where you don't know anybody, but you'll be within your team. And what I would like you to do is just think about and discuss these 5 different companies and decide, are they more outside in or are they more inside out? Which category would you put them in and why? So you can discuss that in your groups, and also you can discuss, do you think your company is going to be more outside in or inside out? So I'll give you 7 minutes to work on that. I'll start the timer again where it's time to go. And Anna, I think I see you have a question. So do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, can a startup, which is not a spin-off from a bigger company, really have an inside-out perspective? And if so, how can it succeed? I mean, I can hardly imagine that like a startup like originates from nothing and already knows what their strengths are without looking into the market first.
Yeah, so you're asking, could they start from an inside out or could they start from an out? Which one would you say is hard to start from?
I would say it's hard for a startup to be an inside out. Have an inside out perspective.
Yeah, okay, it's a great question. My answer would be it's definitely possible, especially if you're coming from if the founders have certain expertise or have certain knowledge that they want to use. So for example, with the DFAB house, we've had some discussions on how could we spin out some of this technology into new business models. The mesh mold and in situ fabricator especially has been one that has a lot of interest, as well as a smart dynamic casting. And I would say those are both inside out perspectives because they're saying, here is the technology that we want to start with. It might be a little bit more difficult if you don't have that expertise or knowledge, but you might still be able to say, I know what technology I want to use. I want to use 3D printing. You know, I don't care what the market, I want to use 3D printing. Right, that would be an inside out perspective.
Thanks.
No, it's a very good question. Okay, so I've got the breakout rooms predefined. If you somehow get bumped out, just come back to the main room and I'll reassign you. If you're the only one from your team, that means come back and I'll try to reassign you again. So hopefully some other team members are here. And we're gonna go do that now. So have a nice breakout session. Welcome back, everyone. So I think I'm sharing the Jamboard now, and I'm pretty impressed. Pretty good job. I also was laughing because we only made one. I didn't think about the fact that you would all be fighting over who could move what. So here's a little bit of a battle there, I'm sure. But yeah, just to not go too long on this, I would actually really agree with these categorizations. So News Story and Katera both really emphasize their outside-in perspective, how they want to meet the needs of customers. Digital building components is absolutely an inside-out perspective. It is based on the capabilities that DPR had around BIM, building information modeling, and then they were looking on just expanding upon those capabilities. And Daiwa House, I would say it's a bit more inside-out, but somewhere certainly in the middle. They do think about their customers a lot. And same with Vedika. So really nice job as you guys battled it out. The crowdsourcing, I guess, won out in the end. But yeah, I think this kind of gives you an overview of what we're talking about. So let me go back to our presentation. And feel free, yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. So I could summarize again, right? So we have our different strategies. We could think about these two different areas here, these two different ways of thinking about it. And then, you know, if you kind of think about on the left side here, this customer decoupling point with engineering to order, make to order, customize to order, configure to order, and select variant. One thing that we can do is change those into a horizontal spectrum here, right? So I've just put engineer to order on the left, all the way over to select variant on the right. And then you have a horizontal axis, and then you have a vertical axis here with your outside in and inside out perspective. And you put these things together, and now you can kind of create a map of strategic orientations for industrialized construction companies. And there's a couple papers that have done this to kind of show how different approaches have different groupings. And you know, if I would plot our companies that we talked about already, our example companies, Beauclerc only offers one single kind of select variant. They have a couple of different options, but you can't really configure the product. So here it's outside in with the select variant products. And RNA has their inside out perspective, but they're making small little adjustments. We'll hear more about that moving forward, but they still have a lot of flexibility in the system. And what you'll need to do as part of your project, again, this is a little bit 2 weeks in advance from when you should really be thinking about it, but is to plot your company on this map and some of your competitors. So who do you think could be your closest competitors that already exist on the market? And where do you and these competitors fall on this strategic orientation map so that we can see if you really thought about how your strategy fits. Okay, so we're gonna now go to the next 5-minute break. I promised short breaks. So we'll take here a 5-minute break and come back together. What time is it? Well, let's say at 4:15. So short break, come back together for the last 15 minutes, and we're going to talk about business models and logistics. So we're going to talk about business models and logistics in the last 15 minutes of class. You know, let's start by just kind of an overview of essentially, what is a business model? So a business model explains the logic of the company, the way it operates, and how value is created for the shareholders. What you've worked on so far is probably focused the most on your product offering here. So this is the idea that it's, what are you offering? What is your product you're developing? you may begin to be thinking a little bit, so you're still thinking about this a lot, and next you might think a little bit also about the operational platform, but then you also have to think a little bit about the market position. We'll say more about these, but this is kind of another way of thinking about business models. A third way is really looking at, I like this chart, which talks about you have a value proposition, you have customer relations, you have revenue, you have resources, partners, and activities. And the business model is the way that all of those different things piece together. And you can get more specific by really diving into each of these. So the product offering at the highest level is, what do you offer? What is the product that you're building? It could be the type of buildings that you make, and also how predefined and how standardized are your products. Is your product platform. Identifying who is your customer and what are their priorities, and what are the price levels and cost levels that you want to build for. So that's your product strategy, your offering. You then have over here your production strategy. So this really gets into the level of prefabrication, right? Are you going to do volumetric or kit of parts or robotics? What's your kind of production strategy? How much work are you going to do at the building site? Are you going to own the production, or are you going to buy it from suppliers? We'll talk about that. And then how developed is your product platform with which level of predefinition? So that's really about your production strategy here. And then finally, there's this market position. So what is your role in the supply chain? Who do you sell to? How do you bring in revenue? What type of funding needs do you have in terms of getting your company started? What's the relationship with the end customer? And then very importantly, what are your relationships upstream and downstream? Upstream relationships means earlier in the process, who do you need to collaborate with? Who do you need to pay, or who's going to pay you to provide them something? And then downstream is who are you contracting with? Who are you going to pay, and they're going to provide you some piece of work? And are those relationships occasional on a single basis, or do you develop more long-term strategies? So that's your business strategy there. So between your product strategy, your production strategy, and your business strategy, you really can put together a holistic business model here. And again, we're 2 or 3 weeks early here, but when you're creating your pitch and your final project report, you think a little bit about your business model and your overall strategy, answering some of these questions here. So that's business models. And next, I'm just going to briefly touch on logistics being integrated into the building process. So logistics, loosely is the overall approach in which you're going to deal with the supply chain and the coordination of activities, especially interfaces and handoffs between one stage and another stage. So if you think about specifically what you mean, it's the flow of materials and related information that's integrated with design, planning, manufacture, and site work. You want to make sure you've also considered transportation that's coordinated throughout the supply chain, especially for prefabrication. You need to make sure that whatever you're designing will fit into the transportation systems nearby. Most often that means, will it fit on the back of a truck? If you've designed something too large for a truck to move for your market, then that's going to be a major challenge. You need to also ensure that material, component, and element suppliers can be involved in the development process, and that suitable equipment for material handling can be used throughout the supply chain. So do you have the right lifts? Do you have the right hooks so that pieces can be moved into the final location? There are some other questions as well, like where is your factory? How many factories? What's your factory layout? How many production lines? What equipment do you purchase for the factory? How does transportation from the factory to the site work? And, for the purposes of the course project, we just asked that you might need to think a little bit about these different processes and detail your strategy. And a lot of times that depends on your manufacturing strategy in the production process. And this is the classic question of make or buy. So in a make mindset, you make all the products yourself, and you try to not buy from suppliers, but you want to have tight control. Katerra is a good example. They really are making everything from cabinets all the way through to the end product. They're trying to make every single piece of the house inside one single factory. Project Frog is really on the opposite end. They make nothing, but instead they do the digital systems integration, and they find ways that they partner with suppliers that can make their products, right? So it's very capital light. We talked about these different approaches to the business model, but the manufacturing strategy will then follow. And then in the middle, you also could have kind of a mix. You could have multiple factories where you make different things, different factories, and you also have ways that you source from other partners. But whatever your solution is, you'll have to detail your logistics plan for that. And if you go towards a more distributed partners approach, you really need to put more emphasis on your supply chain management, how you coordinate between multiple distributed partners that are manufacturing your pieces for you. If you go more towards the integrated factory, then I would like to see have you thought a little bit more about the factory layout and the stations and how you'll have all these different pieces manufactured within the factory. This is a really nice video. I'm not going to play it just for the sake of time, but the Barclay Group did a really nice video, which I linked in the YouTube, that shows kind of their factory layout. And this is the level of detail that I might ask you to do if you're going to propose an integrated factory. So where do the goods come in? What are the different stations? So here they have their framing station, their service station, their bathroom station, their windows and sub-assembly station, their testing station, and then it goes out this way, right? So you've kind of designed your factory flow. Another example from Japan, I didn't take this picture, but you can see here that the factory is built in a U shape, and so you have an easy supply of materials to all different parts. So the materials can come from the outside, while the actual modules flow in kind of a U shape, and they go out the same way they come in. There's different designs, but there are different options for how you want to lay out a factory. Then you could think about kind of this distributed factory, which is really about the interconnection between different factories, and how you create a supply chain management system that can deal with all of that. So the idea is that global supply chain with smart interconnected factories might be a challenge in the new era of coronavirus, but at the same time, it's less susceptible to high demand fluctuations because you don't own the high cost of the capital equipment. And I'm not going to spend too much time here because logistics are really important, but at the very early stages of a startup, it's about the product offering. So I would like to see that you've considered these, but you spend more of your time developing your solutions, your technical solutions, and your customer focus. But I have linked to a few different examples of logistics. Here's a nice video about Katerra's RFID system. Manufacton is an emerging company that deals specifically with supply chain management for industrialized construction. There's a nice video of the assembly process by the Kriebe-Romberg system. They're just across the border in Austria, and they have a very nice Lifecycle 1 tower that they made a video of. And here's a really nice paper. We've added it to the project resources. It shows many different types of machining for timber panels. So if you're doing a timber solution, you can see the different setups of the different stations, and you can start to get an idea of what types of machinery you might need for different timber panels, for example, if you wanted to use those. So you can check out that paper either in the link, or I think we've posted the whole paper into the course resources. In general, I would encourage you to visit the course resources. We've posted a lot of very helpful papers or kind of think pieces that might help guide some of your thinking right now as you're developing your solutions. So with that, that's the end for today. I'm happy to answer a few questions. And while you're thinking of your questions, I just want to point out that assignment 5 is still open. It's the case study for Vaucluse. Please make sure to complete that before next class, because what we're going to do is for the first 45 minutes, we'll have a guest lecture from Jurker Lessing, who is the Director of Innovation, Vaucluse, also the person who came up with your framework and has been teaching industrialized construction now for 7 years at Stanford. I was one of his first students in 2012, 2013. And it's kind of was one of the starting points for my interest in industrialized construction. And then the second half, we're going to have an in-depth case discussion. So we'll have kind of a guided set of questions with a series of breakout rooms. So you really need to make sure you've read the case study. It's a fascinating company, one of the biggest success stories in industrialized construction. So I really encourage you to take a look at that. With that, we have about 5 minutes left, and I'm happy to answer any questions either about the contents, the course project, the course in general, any questions you might have, now is a good chance to ask. Feel free to raise your hand or type it into the chat.